Spider-Man Life Story is one of Marvel's more unique comics that they've put out in recent years simply because it takes a beloved character and it takes the story in a direction that we haven't really seen them take Spider-Man before. I'm Deanna Chapman, and today I'm going to review Spider-Man Life Story. This comic is written by Chip Zdarsky and illustrated by Mark Bagley. Mark Bagley has worked on Spider-Man previously. He did a very lengthy run, and you can tell that he has a lot of love for this character just with the way he draws him. The difference in Life Story being that he gets to draw Peter as he ages, and that's not really something Marvel tends to do with any of their superheroes, to be honest, because they are constantly rebooting the comics and bringing on new creators, doing new storylines. And over the years, Spider-Man has had so many different runs that, well, one, it's kind of hard to keep track of them, but two, we only ever see Peter, kind of get up to his 30s, and he does get married, and granted, that's not every single Spider-Man run, but this one, being a 6-issue series, really does a lot of work in a short amount of time, or in pages, if you will, since these are comics, and each issue is about 32 pages, give or take, and you really get to see Peter go from being a student to becoming an old man who can't really get around quite as well as he used to. Even though he still has his spider strength and all of these things, he definitely is feeling his age at times. And what Chip Zdarsky does here is he brings all of these stories that a lot of Spider-Man fans are already going to be familiar with, and he just brings them into this alternate timeline for Peter where he actually does age. And I really enjoyed that because you see how Peter's maturity allows him to handle these things maybe a little differently than we had seen in those original comics. In the first issue, we kind of revisit Amazing Spider-Man number 39. In the second issue, you get a lot of action with the Green Goblin, who we know is Harry Osborn's father, Norman. And then you also revisit the night that Gwen Stacy died, which is a huge, huge moment in the comics. And it doesn't feel like this series cheapens those moments by any means. It's just putting them into a different context that I think works really, really well, because as someone who has read not nearly all of the Spider-Man comics, but a good amount of them. I've probably read somewhere between 100 to 200 different Spider-Man issues, and I know there are many, many more than that, but I am familiar with a lot of these big storylines, and we see Kraven appear, and a lot of people have read Kraven's Last Hunt. So there are all of these stories that we're familiar with, and they're just being brought to life in a new light. And I think the artwork from Mark Bagley in particular really just lets that shine, because we all kind of know generally what Peter looks like as someone in his 20s and 30s. We've seen slightly different iterations of him, but for the most part, you can tell he's Peter Parker. But as he's aging up, it's something new. And I think, we've seen Aunt May kind of go back and forth between being older and younger, and she looks more like his grandmother at times than just his aunt. So seeing that happen to Peter was really interesting, because we have seen storylines where he and MJ are married and have kids, and it isn't quite the same in this series, but you get to see them as they're older and have kids, and the kids appear to be late teens roughly. Claire, the daughter, is getting ready to decide whether or not she is going to go to Stanford. And it's one of those things where you get to see Peter and MJ together. And even though you also see him with Gwen, and this is all happening in the span of 6 issues, it doesn't feel like the story is really rushed. And I think having a longer page count on each issue helps a lot with that, because you're getting, roughly 10 pages more than you would in a normal comic. And for me, I just really liked getting to revisit these storylines told from a slightly different perspective. Obviously, Peter is still Peter, and he kind of has the same mannerisms, the same feelings and thoughts, but he has aged. And in the final issue, what they do is they bring in Miles Morales, and he's in his iconic red and black suit. And the only downside with that issue was that they had Doc Ock take over. And you feel like it really didn't give Miles much of a spotlight because you can tell kind of what this is building up to. And by the end of the issue, you know that Miles is set to take over the mantle of Spider-Man. But he has this feeling that he's not going to be able to do that because of what Doc Ock did when he was parading around town as Miles. And I understand that. I just kind of wish they would have given us a little more of Miles at the end there instead of just, for the majority of it, having Doc Ock taking over Miles's body. But that aside, I do think this was a really, really solid series, and I would recommend, even though I have mentioned here kind of what happens in some of the issues, there's still a lot to take in, and I really recommend that people check this one out, especially longtime Spider-Man fans or new Spider-Man fans, because this is a contained story that you can just read start to finish, and it doesn't matter if you haven't read all of the issues that are referenced within these 6 issues. So I highly recommend this. Great job by Chip Zdarsky and Mark Bagley. I'm really glad Mark was able to get back on a Spider-Man book, and I am hoping I get more time to dive into comic books here soon, but Stephen King reading has been keeping me very busy for my podcast, Chat Cemetery, and you can check out my other podcast, Welcome to Geekdom. Links to both of those are in the show notes. If you like this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.